Hello, beautiful community. Mr. Girkin is running for president, so he thinks or claims. Let's look at whether that has any significance and what interesting things we might say about it. First of all, let's start with what Mr. Girkin says. He's got a 6-point manifesto that, of course, is going to carry weight because it's being proclaimed from a position of incarceration. And it blends making substantive criticisms of Putin that absolutely hit the key talking points in many hardline critical of Putin circles, while at the same time offering them up as virtually praise for Putin's resplendent personality. Number one, Girkin says the president refuses to lead the military operations because he's not a military person. I could lead the military operations. Our president, number two, is an extremely trusting person. He's trusted lots of people, from Obama to Trump to Poroshenko to Merkel to Zelensky, and is being duped, and I wouldn't be duped by anybody like that. Number three, our current president is too kind. When the special military operation began, it became clear to him that he wasn't just misled by his enemies, but he was also misled by the leaders of our law enforcement agencies, our intelligence, our military industrial complex. And despite that, people in key positions of leadership in these agencies are still there despite their extravagant incompetence. With me, they wouldn't be. Number four, our president has lots of friends among billionaires and businessmen. And because he is a person of kindness and breadth of soul, unlike me, he can't refuse whatever they ask from him. Number five, our president is a highly moral person and is always true to his word, firmly fulfilling the promises given to those who brought him to power in the late 90s. He is a hostage of these people, and again, I wouldn't be. 6, I'm not as athletic and healthy as our president was at my age, and so you don't have to worry that I'm going to stay in power for 20 years and that you won't be able to get rid of me. Even if I wanted to mess with you for physical reasons, I couldn't be a usurper of power. Now, let's do a little bit of an analysis of this. Now, Girkin realistically is not going to be able to run or even register for the election. The only way he would be allowed to register is if he were a Kremlin project of some kind, and there is no evidence of that. So Russia experts would be very surprised if Mr. Girkin was allowed to run. It's not quite my lane to analyze what Girkin is after. He is clearly balancing safety and ambition, but he's also perhaps trying to elevate risk today so as to reduce his risk down the line. He's trying to make a kerfuffle, a self-sustenance in the informational environment that requires him to say edgy stuff, but stuff that's edgy that's still not too edgy to get him killed. And staying important that way might guarantee him safety in the medium term a little bit better. So he's balancing plenty of things. But the analysis here that really matters is that this act is an act of politicization of the Russian space. And it's an act of politicization of the Russian space by somebody from the radical side. somebody who is, if you like, more pro-war and pro-victory than Putin. And that's a pattern that's going to develop unpredictably over the months to come running up to the election in Russia. So the key things to understand here are that this is a pattern that nobody can stop, that actors who participate in that pattern might themselves not be able to control the process, but it's going to roll on anyway. And this is going to be a problem for the Kremlin. Despite the elimination of Prigozhin, this is going to be a problem for the Kremlin. It's going to roll on and on and on. And it's going to, of course, intersect with a conflict inside the regime, right, about how to approach the war. There is the sort of let's have a breather camp, and there is the let's militarize society and go full pelt camp. Now, because Girkin is a criminal gangster, we can't praise him for this act of politicization, but nevertheless, we can say, isn't it interesting that he's doing it with some measure of failure or success, whereas others who should be doing it aren't, right? The Russian opposition are struggling to politicize the Russian space, right? Ukraine is not really trying to politicize the Russian space. We could talk about the significance of the drone attacks on Russian soil, but it's not clear that that's their central purpose. Their central purpose historically has been for domestic consumption, right? And secondly, now as we're moving from the symbolic to the effective stage of Ukraine's drone war, their purpose might actually be effective. Yeah, let's destroy some gear. There are other purposes. I won't get into that now. And we in the West are not politicizing the Russian space. We barely have a Russia policy at all, except that we should support Ukraine to the point that ensures they survive, but not to the point of victory. And that's our Russia policy, roughly speaking. So we're not looking at what possible stuff might happen in the Russian space, how we might react to it, and how we might indeed play a very small role in bringing about more of the stuff we want and less of the stuff we don't want, right? So Girkin is giving us an evil version of something that should be benignly practiced, but isn't, by a multiplicity of parties to this conflict. Now, the main form of this politicization over the next few months, if not years, in Russia, looks like it will come from this hardline side. And it's worth saying, because we often talk about that segment of different groupings in Russia with a sort of a range of support that, I don't know, it taps out, let's say, 15%. Which is a serious number of people. But when we talk about them, I deliberately don't do much to distinguish, right? So there are different subgroups there, and they don't all like each other, and they're not equally as authentic as political actors, right? So the group that we sometimes talk about, a very small group that's led by Mr. Dugin, but contains other people like Mr. Prokhanov. That group is about, if you like, bullshit about the Russian soul, right? They are narodniks who talk about the authentic expression of Russian culture. Often they tie that to violence. And that is one of the radical segments. Another segment are the ideologues of return. And these are folks who have connections with former parts of the Soviet Union that aren't Russia anymore, that they want to be Russia again. Right? And that is Mr. Girkin himself, also Mr. Kalashnikov, and others. And then there is the big group of the bureaucratic Z radicals, right? These are people who are doing a song and dance for the Russian state. So they're a kind of a semi-artificial political force, but nevertheless with some propensity to, via turbulence, get out of control. So it's among such groups that we're going to see whatever politicization happens in Russia over the next months, if not years. And therefore, our conclusion about Mr. Girkin's announcement and sort of fake bid for presidency is that it matters because it is an illustration of an illustration of the many unpredictable occurrences of its type that are going to happen in the near future and pose a problem for the Kremlin. Beautiful community. I hope to release a video today on the main channel that was going to be a kind of a rant. It's very important for me to share. It's one of the more ethically minded pieces I've wanted to share with you. I've shared two in the past, one about responsibility, collective responsibility, and there was one about evil, and this is going to be another one. Yesterday I tried so hard to make it happen for today, but for health reasons it just wasn't possible at all. So we're kind of looking at midweek at the moment, but I'll be absolutely thrilled once it's there for you, and we'll continue to meet regularly on the chat channel meanwhile. That's enough for the moment. Bye bye.